I was recently in a game against Shalinda Yevan Acolyte, and I gotta tell you, she was kind of an overperformer. Like, she came in clutch. You might say that when you're in need, Shalinda hand. Hey, it's Joey. Welcome back to the channel. Let's get EDH wrecked. And let's talk about Bracket 1. And steel yourself because it's going to be kind of a tough conversation. I've previously done some videos investigating some of the nuances of various brackets, from exploring practical examples of a deck at each bracket to showcasing the rate of user-selected brackets according to the data. As part of those videos, I've seen a lot of comments about Bracket 1 specifically, and have experimented a little bit more with Bracket 1 in my own time as well. So I've basically been sitting on just a whole lot of thoughts about Bracket 1 for a while now. And since Command Zone recently did a video about the cool parts of both Bracket 4 and Bracket 1, this feels to me like it might be the right time to actually take some of my abstract thoughts just rolling around in my head and give them some proper analysis. I probably called this video like the Bracket 1 problem, but is it actually a problem? Are the issues that I'm about to discuss just growing pains, or is there something structural about how Commander gets played that makes Bracket 1 feel kind of awkward no matter how good the intentions are? Well, to even begin answering any of those questions, we have to take a step back and look at the brackets themselves and what players actually expect from them when they sit down at the table. All right, so context part 1, and I know a lot of people will know this already, but let's just make sure we're all on the same page here. The bracket system has 5 distinct categories of deck that serve as a very broad way for players to begin to identify a pod of like-minded players to better align with what's going to bring that group the best time in a game. Bracket 5, for instance, is the highest power of decks that you can imagine, and you wouldn't want to bring a Bracket 3 deck, which is much more measured in its power, to a pod with all 5s, or vice versa, because that type of mismatch wouldn't make for the most dynamic or satisfying game. Bracket 1 is in many ways the meme tier. Decks like this prioritize shiggles. They prioritize creative expression at the expense of being good. I saw someone on Reddit make a really good comparison, actually, that this is a lot like the Architect deck building challenges that happen every month, which linked below for anyone interested. But yeah, in those, it's not that you're trying to win a game. Imagine it more like you're trying to win over a judges panel based off of how well you committed to the bit or leaned into the gimmick. Think of like a Socrates all philosophy deck where you're playing like Stoic rebuttal, or linked below, I have a reading the card explains the card deck, where all of the cards are textless or confusing or lying to you. Or another one that I've been working on is Everything Reminds Me of Him, a deck that contains a bunch of cards like Deep Wood and Colossal Plow and Portable Hole, things that make you think, I should really call him. It will also be linked in the description. Merry Christmas, you filthy animals. All right, context part 2. Bracket 1 decks are played in extremely low amounts right now. In a video that I did ages ago, we saw that just 5.2% of decks were self-selected as Bracket 1 by their brewers. That was from some data that we got specifically reported from Architect during the very early stages of the bracket announcements. Since that data was a smidge older and I wanted a more comprehensive and recent bit of data, I asked our Duchess of Data, Julia Maddalena, what percentage of decks in the entire EDH Rec database, not just from one site, but from all of the sites that we draw from, what percentage of those decks were labeled by users as being Bracket 1. And of the decks that have user-selected brackets, she reported back that Bracket 1 accounts for 1.59% of that population as of the current moment. So just 1 or maybe 2 decks out of 100 are likely to be Bracket 1. Listen, there are blind spots for EDH Rec that we certainly don't see in the data, but you can certainly agree that the number of Bracket 1 decks out there is very small. Context part 3, since it is such a vanishingly small population, there are a lot of folks who think that therefore Bracket 1 doesn't need to exist at all. And this isn't a position that I happen to hold, but it is an attitude worth us being aware of as we go forward with this video. Like, there are probably going to be a whole lot of comments on this very video making basically that case, that Bracket 1 doesn't need to exist. And that is just not a position that I happen to hold. I actually think that Olivia did a really great job of nailing the justification for creating a space like this in that Command Zone interview that she did. She said it super well, said it way better than I could. And like, well, yes, in this video, I am going to be exploring what I think are some of the potential issues that arise with Bracket 1 with the current state of Commander. That does not make this an anti-Bracket 1 video. I'd like to explore those issues so that we can map them out and understand them better, rather than saying that since those issues exist, we should do away with the whole thing entirely. No, I just want to understand the complexity of the thing. Like, I'm talking about problems with a thing that I like because I like it, not because I want it to perish. Blades need whetstones. Context part 4, Bracket 1 is a very easy to misunderstand place. It says theme in the description, and that has caused a lot of people to surmise that, for instance, maybe an elf-themed deck might be Bracket 1, or a dragon-themed deck, things like that. And no, that's not what this means here. My theme is elves is not Bracket 1, like, at all. Elves are phenomenal. That is just good mechanical synergy, Diva. Bracket 1 is something that you're doing to make your deck worse, on purpose for the purposes of showmanship and goofs. Personal favorite example of mine is Megan from Infinite Tokens, who has an Island of Misfit Tokens deck in which the entire goal of the deck is to try and make as many different kinds of tokens as possible, especially the wacky and wild ones that you maybe have never seen before. To highlight this type of misconstrual even more, I've had a lot of people ask me why my Commander deck doesn't count as bracket 1. This is a deck that has an extremely strict theme where every card must refer to a commander. On its face, that probably sounds like a bracket 1 theme, especially when you hear that I've applied that same restriction to all of my non-basic lands too. You know, it's a 4-color deck with barely any color fixing. However, I have personally classified this as a bracket 2 deck instead of a bracket 1 deck, because it's just still pretty good. The commanders Artana and Timna, and backgrounds amplifying 2 legends at the same time is just plain strong, y'all. I have purposefully hamstrung the deck, for sure. And even then, if I manage to keep a commander in play, a lot of these cards are just good. Like Deadly Rollick says commander on it, you know? Point being, there are a lot of folks who hear that there is a restriction on a deck and assume that because of that definite restriction, that automatically things are going to the bracket 1 space, when that just is not necessarily the case. Just because it's a restriction doesn't mean that it is capturing the same oeuvre or energy that is supposed to characterize bracket 1. Maybe a better personal example of a bracket 1 deck would be my Marina Vendrell list, a deck where I am attempting to build a haunted house, which is why the land base is indeed garbage, but the entire thing is architecturally sound. She's got a strong ETB effect for sure, but I didn't make this an Enchantress list. I made it because I want to see the look on your face when I cast Defenestrate and toss one of your creatures out of one of my windows, or when you discover that my house has a false floor. The point in that deck is that I am kind of trying to make you laugh with each card that I play. Like, your exasperation is my joy. I am stealing your life force. With every facepalm that I make you do, I only grow stronger. Why else do you think that dad jokes and puns have been a part of this channel for so long? It's because we're all energy vampires over here. And the only way that you can stop us is by, I don't know, liking and subscribing. In case this helps as further clarification, one of my favorite memories of playing this bracket 1 Marina Vendrell list was when a buddy cast Foundation Breaker to kill one of my room cards. And the entire table just laughed it up at a foundation being broken and how my market value had just plummeted and the perils of not having done a proper home inspection. Like, everyone getting in on the bit, that is what makes for compelling, joyful, bracket 1 fueled moments of gameplay. The final word on whether or not a card will make it into a bracket 1 deck for me is whether or not it's going to make other people smile at the table. And once I start asking, how might this deck win the game, I feel as though I'm exiting the bracket 1 area. That's kind of the vibe that I hope is captured here. Real quick, before I get too much further, if you've got a bracket 1 deck that you want to show off or that you just are really proud of or that you think is even kind of cool, like just anything like that, please link it down in the comments for me. I'm really interested to see even more of what it is that people are experimenting with in this area. So yeah, if you don't mind, if you want to share in the comments, that'd be really rad. I'm very hungry to see what it is that people are tinkering with there. And also, if you'd like to support the show, you can do so over at patreon.com/EDHRecast. Your support means the world. There's a bunch of really cool perks over there for you. So yeah, feel free to hit that up if you would like to. But the main thing is that, like, I want to see those deck lists, okay? Like, I think they're so cool. I want to see more. So, okay, that's a whole lot of context. That's all well and good. That all sounds very ideal, even. But let's talk about the flip side, because despite my fond memories of those types of moments, and despite some of the joy that some of these goofy decks bring in concept, bracket 1 also comes with a lot of practical problems out here in the real world, creating issues during gameplay, forcing certain expectations, causing a whole lot of salt sometimes. And even worse, not all of these solutions to those problems always feel practical or possible either. So let's hear a quick word from our sponsors and then dive into the issues with bracket 1. First, Dragon Shield. Dragon Shield has sleeves with officially licensed magic art from fetch lands to the Dragon, and it has an upcoming line of guild sleeves that we're very excited about. Plus, they have custom sleeves. In fact, if you want to get custom EDHREC sleeves, very dark side of the moon, you can check out the link in the description below. And if you order from their store, use code EDHREC for a discount. Again, that's code EDHREC, all lowercase, for a discount on Dragon Shield's superb sleeves. This video is also brought to you by CardSphere, which is really bringing the trading back into the trading card game. This is a fantastic online service where you can trade your cards. You can put up a list of cards that you're after and folks can send them to you, or you can go look through other people's wants list and send them cards that you're not using. I find it's a really lovely and unstressful user experience too. Rather than people buying stuff from you and then you feel a time pressure to go send them cards in the post office right away, it's kind of the inverse. You look through other people's wants list if you would like to send them cards at your own convenience. And that makes for a really nice and chill time while you're trading cards that you're not using and getting cards that you will put into decks. Go check them out at cardsphere.com/EDHRecast. And one last announcement, we've officially released the Space Cow Media merch store at shop.spacecowmedia.com. We've teamed up with Architect and Cardsphere and a bunch of awesome deck building websites so that you can get cool stuff from cool places. Mugs, hats, t-shirts, hoodies, playmats, just accessories that are really dang good quality. Go check it out at shop.spacecowmedia.com. Okay, so now it's time for the tough part, the problems associated with trying to build or play Bracket 1. Not all of them are huge, enormous problems that can't be overcome or anything, but I just don't want to glide over some of those potential anxieties or speed bumps that prevent people from ever wanting to engage with this potential area of Commander. The only way out is through, so we've got to address these issues to see them for what they really are. Issue number 1 is kind of the context piece that we saw earlier already, that the population of Bracket 1 decks is exceedingly small right now. You saw the data earlier. Currently, it's not reasonable to expect that if you go to a game night, that multiple other people there would even have a Bracket 1 deck on them. You've got limited space in your bag and all that, and no one thinks that a Bracket 1 game is going to happen, which then also kind of causes exactly that to happen. That's one of the ironies of normalization, right? People might be on board with a full Bracket 1 pod if they thought that those were actually happening, but right now everyone's conception is that it only exists in the form of mismatches. The population of Bracket 1 decks is so small that you basically don't end up having Bracket 1 pods. You have a pod where there's a Bracket 1 deck with a bunch of other Bracket 2 decks. Every game that I've ever played that I believe contained a Bracket 1 deck was a mismatch in that way, where it was the unique thing at that table. So far, this is more parts observation than issue, but this is the central thing that kind of causes other dominoes to fall later on. Right off the bat, there just are going to be some people who will not want a mismatch of any kind, in the same way that they wouldn't want to, I don't know, play a Bracket 3 into a pod of a whole bunch of Bracket 4s or whatever. A hopeful solution is, of course, to continue to normalize and to encourage more Bracket 1 types of gameplay. If we want a world with more Bracket 1 gaffs, that is something that we have to carve, a space that we have to make. In some ways, you almost kind of have to force the issue. You have to push that envelope. But yeah, issue number 1 kind of ends up just being a matter of perception and also timing. By the time that you even arrive at game night, the reality is already sort of settled for that evening. So to break that reality, it requires conversation well beyond and outside of the game night moment, well before FNM. And while there are some people like me who are well and truly obsessed about Magic, even in our off time, there are a lot of players who just do not engage with the game on that basis. So building up momentum from outside of the FNM moments just presents a challenge. Issue number 2, and this is frankly the big one, the way that Bracket 1 affects gameplay. In the event that the pod has a Bracket 1 silly goof deck alongside some Bracket 2 decks, the way that gameplay gets affected, even in laid-back, easygoing spaces like Bracket 2, can sometimes cause a shift in the dynamics of gameplay that could end up being a little bit unsavory, even when in the pursuit of a chill time, even when in the pursuit of goofs. The biggest example of this, to me, is that a bit of a harumph moment can occur when you're in a game and one player is very clearly in the archenemy position, and there comes this mutual desire from everyone else to coordinate efforts so as to defeat that person, to take them down from where they're currently at in this overwhelming position. But that Bracket 1 silly goof deck has no meaningful contribution that could be of any assistance in that scenario, because the most efficient or usual removal spells are not on their theme, for instance. So their interaction is either clumsy or completely absent, and therefore, instead of 3 players joining forces to try and take down an archenemy, it becomes 2 players and a ham sandwich. I say this as the person who has been the ham sandwich in a scenario like that, like all love to the ham, but I recognize when I'm the ham. Or putting it another way, it can sometimes feel like you're signing up for a 3-player game instead of a 4-player game. And maybe that doesn't sound like a whole lot to some folks, but the number of players in a game does affect game speed a lot. Like just look at how many people refuse to ever play in a pod that has 5 players. If you've played 3-player games, then you know how much more quickly those can go. With fewer opportunities for interaction, for instance, that means that some of these amazing snowball value engine solve all their own problems commanders out there will begin to reach a terminal velocity a whole lot faster just because they were left alone a little bit more. Even if, like, say, the Bracket 1 player probably has fewer pieces on the board in the first place, that could be the kind of thing that enables certain strategies to more reliably get damage proc triggers, as another example. What I'm saying is that the game could pick up speed by accident and have a higher chance of ending more quickly, not because the decks aren't actually Bracket 2, but just because there's less resistance to impede them when one of the players is doing the goofy stuff. So ironically, including a deck that does not care about winning and which is meant to slow the pace down could actually inadvertently end up causing it to accelerate instead. I think it's also fair to point out that there's a greater chance of king-making scenarios to occur when the meaningful dynamics are contained to 3 players instead of 4 players. And kingmaker scenarios are very often looked upon as undesirable outcomes of games too. And I think at first this maybe only sounds like a problem if you're assuming that everyone else at the table is like invested in winning. So let me please clarify that you don't have to care about winning to have moments like that still affect you or still feel like a bummer. To the bracket 1 player, winning doesn't matter. Doing the funny thing is the goal. And hopefully also the bracket 2 players in this mixed pod, which again, a mixed pod is one of the only types of pods that practically exist for bracket 1 decks to play at all as of right now. Hopefully also to all of those other players, they too have deprioritized winning the game. But their deck is still designed to do stuff. They want to do as the brackets say and have everyone showcase their plans here in that more casual environment. But if the game ends up picking up speed accidentally because there's less resistance at the table, that will affect the expected casual pace of play. And that being affected could tilt the scales away from people's capabilities of just making a cool synergy happen. That dynamic could make it so that some folks will not be able to meet the brief of the bracket where each deck gets to showcase its plan. And that will be a weird feeling that I expect many players may not find that enjoyable. I guess to try and sum this anxiety up, the fail states of bracket 1 could end up accidentally pushing people off of the idea in ways that the fail states of other brackets don't. I'm just saying, I understand why some players might feel a certain type of way if they just want to make a cool synergy happen, not even like winning the game, but just like the self-expression part of Commander. But when a player across from them is playing a deck that is setting up a joke that may not even be in the game long enough to actually get to the punchline, and when that has a ripple effect all the way over here that also makes it so that they don't get to meet the brief of what their deck was trying to showcase too, I see why that could be a bummer. Quick sidebar that I promise is relevant here. I posted this on socials the other week, that it really bugged me to see the card Seismic Tutelage, a 4-mana aura that gives you a counter and then doubles counters on the enchanted creature when it attacks, get immediately followed up by the card Level Up, a 2-mana enchantment that gives a counter and doubles counters on the enchanted creature when it attacks, and could also draw you a card. For half of the mana, those cards came out basically back to back, like within a matter of months. Is this a devastating end-of-the-world super OP escalation? No, but it bugs me. I feel like these design teams are just not talking to each other. But some of the replies to that post were frankly unhinged. So to at least elaborate a point here, the dynamics that I just described that can emerge even at casual tables is one of the reasons why I still find it reasonable to be worried about power creep even within casual settings. Because power creep reduces the opportunities for casual settings to feel actually casual. People might try and oversimplify here and act like this is only a problem if you care about winning, but actually that's not the truth, Ellen. Bracket 2 easygoing gameplay is affected by what gets printed. Overpowered commanders or slightly more pushed cards will show up in bracket 2 because they're just the cards that people own and therefore what they play. And that just complicates things in general for casual spaces, but especially when bracket 1 decks are trying to be present and accidentally change the field that all of those decks are accustomed to navigating. I'm not saying that Level Up is overpowered and a sign of the end times for all the iPad babies that need extra clarification out there. I'm just saying that people bought Ashling and Ishtola and Yoreni precons. When the entire format speeds up, that doesn't just affect the competitive end, it affects the casual side too, TLDW, bracket 1 decks actually have a lot in common with bracket 5 CEDH decks. They are both some of the most complicated types of decks to build, for one thing, but also, whenever there's one of them at a table, the entire game is going to be shifted by that dynamic. When there's a CEDH deck at the table, it's kind of running how the game goes. And when there's a bracket 1 deck present, the focus and pace of that game will also be affected in ways that it turns out some folks just may not have anticipated, even including the bracket 1 player. I guess another potential way of saying this is that bracket 1 affects everything that it touches. If there is a bracket 1 deck in a pod at all, then it isn't a bracket 2 game with a bracket 1 deck there. It is a bracket 1 game. That's just a reality worth knowing. And there are going to be some people who are on board with that and some people who just aren't. So, okay, one of the only places where bracket 1 decks get to exist at all is in mismatched pods. And when they're in those mismatched pods, sometimes gameplay dynamics can occur that take some players by surprise or take them aback. What do we do about it? What are the solutions here? Well, the solution to those potential moments of bad feeling is, of course, to make utterly sure that you recognize the vibe properly before the game begins. And maybe that's just a thing that comes with experience. If there's a bracket 1 deck doing goof-off stuff that you said yes to, you signed up for the game dynamics that are going to be not just unusual, but maybe even a little bit out of your hands. You signed up for this. And my goal in saying that is not to criticize or admonish or whatever, but just to address the actual reality so that we can all get more comfortable with it, so that it is more normalized. I honestly think a great comparison here would be to consider how group hug decks can also alter table dynamics even within an all bracket 2 or all bracket 3 pod or something like that. Like some group hug dog decks do just pick one opponent to favor the entire game, so as to insurrection them later on or something. Like, that's also going to be a dynamic that affects the table in a pretty unusual way. Or someone playing a goad deck may accidentally enhance a planeswalkers deck across the table, because goaded creatures can't attack planeswalkers. That would be another weird dynamic too. Like, I've given all of this attention to the specific ways that a bracket 1 deck will shift focus, but there are also tons of other decks that already exist in the bracket 2 and the bracket 3 areas that tilt the scales in similar ways for strategic purposes. And those will also sometimes ruin your plans or stop your abilities to do cool synergies too. And we don't look two ways at those, do we? Hopefully, keeping that type of comparison in mind might help us to better adjust our expectations of what's possible here, and realize that while this might currently be a problem that stops some players from wanting to play in a pod that has a bracket 1 deck, it isn't actually necessarily a unique problem. And when it feels like a less unique problem, that will hopefully make it feel less insurmountable too. And speaking of this being non-unique, I think it's fair to point out too that any bracket mismatch that you agreed to will probably end up having a very similar dynamic. A bracket 3 deck in a pod of other bracket 4s might feel the same way, for instance. This isn't a problem only for bracket 1. Mismatches will occur sometimes. It's just more of a thing on bracket 1 right now because mismatches are currently the main way to get to play bracket 1 at all. And digging a little more into it, I think this type of mismatch may just also have a slightly increased potential for players to bump on it because it is based in a thing that sounds goofy at first. And then only midway through the game does it become apparent how sometimes that goofiness actually knocked some other dominoes over. Because it sounds goofy, those realities can get really easily breezed past in simple conversation and like pre-game moments and stuff like that. And it ends up getting a little bit hard to put into words why those types of dynamics might not be appealing for you. Like, it's been hard for me to even put it into words for this video. So how on earth do I convey my potential hesitations during a pre-game conversation without coming off like I'm some fun-hating, win-hungry jerk? Like I've said 14 times now that these dynamics could still be a bother or a bummer, even in the context that you don't care that much about winning. And I'm still gonna get people complaining in the comments about how this only matters if you're optimizing, and why can't you lean back and be more chill and don't take it too seriously. And like, yo, I just don't think that that is the case. Discomforts can still occur in the pursuit of chill. These are feelings that are born from wanting to chill, not despite chill. That's the whole reason this even matters. Basically, I just want to make sure that it's understood by more people what you're in for if you play with bracket 1 decks, so as to avoid those moments that could cause surprise or bad feeling if you didn't anticipate some of these other after effects of what all this experience truly encompasses. And my other goal is to also point out that this dynamic could be one of those reasons why some people are more resistant to being on board with bracket 1 in general. These types of mismatches will affect game balance in subtle ways, and that ends up being just another one of those barriers to normalization, and we've got to address those elephants in the room if we ever want them to leave it. Issue number 3, not all bracket 1 decks are created equal. Bracket 1 is memes, commitment to the bit, but some restrictions that people want to use are a lot more restricted than others. And no, I'm not talking about that thing we mentioned earlier where like people think that dragon theme is a bracket 1 deck. Not that kind of theme restriction. That's not what I mean here. Because that's ludicrous. That's a whole other thing. Dragons get mechanical support from wizards. That means you're building around a synergy, not building around a bit. No, I'm talking about another type of potential difference that can exist within theme restrictions here, even when they are all committed to a bit. To refer again to the Command Zone's Bracket 1 video, it was mentioned in that video that Bracket 1 could range from homebrews to precons, although I am guessing older precons given how strong some new ones tend to be. Some examples of like all Avatar or all Final Fantasy or all Fallout are mentioned too, though with the caveat that those are probably living closer to the Bracket 2 space, since Wizards of the Coast reskins staples for those worlds very frequently. And it was mentioned that Bracket 1 decks may not be here to go over the top, but they are still here to play Magic, to participate in the game. They should have removal spells and board wipes, things like that. All of those things sound reasonable to my ear, though I noticed after a fashion that I found myself still sitting with a slight confusion. Like an Oops All Mustaches deck just has a different restraint than Olivia's Duel of the Fates deck, where every card must fit the syllabic meter and rhythm of that iconic piece of Star Wars music. Seaside Citadel, Sliver, Overlord, like that's so rad. But even that has a different restraint than a deck that is based around your favorite band. Some of these will have commanders that actually fit in with what the rest of the deck is doing, and therefore that could move the game forward. And some of them them have commanders that don't do a dang thing with the rest of the 99. Some of these themes might actually have access to themed removal spells, but some of them might not, right? What if some of these are just more capable of playing some actual magic than the others are? It left me wondering whether there were several different things that were all trying to fit underneath the label of Bracket 1. Like, are there actually two different types of Bracket 1 decks happening here? One where the deck is the joke and one where the gameplay is the joke? Or maybe are there even 3 or 4 different types? This isn't a criticism of that video or of Rachel or of Olivia. Literally the only point that I'm trying to make here is that the definitions can still feel muddy. And of course they're going to feel muddy. We're trying to put definitions and rails on things like aesthetics. We're trying to put rails on what is effectively the concept of art. But like, even removing that particular example, when I look at the Marina's House deck that I put together, I mean, it is restrained for sure. And frankly, maybe I need to restrain it even more. But it does still have competent cards. And that's a far cry from those everything reminds me of him or oops, all mustaches examples, where those are a little bit more like art pieces than game pieces. Some Bracket 1 decks, just by dint of the pool of cards that they're drawing from for inspiration, will actually have access to some of those staple categories, like mana accelerants or color fixing or a little bit of extra card advantage here and there, maybe themed removal spells or themed board wipes. And they maybe even will include a few punchy cards that organically could operate as eventual win conditions if things happen to break their way. While other Bracket 1 decks could be more like an art piece unto themselves, where the deck list is kind of the whole joke, but its actual practical play experience will be characterized more by not actually playing many cards, dirtling because it got the wrong colors, top decking because there's not a whole lot of card flow, very little removal and interaction, maybe not even getting the opportunity to play out the jokes that are in your hand. Like, if the theme affects my mana base, my color fixing is probably trash, so I may not even get to cast the jokes that I wanted to tell. And yeah, I don't just mean that they don't contribute to the game by casting interaction spells or whatever, I mean that the chances of them getting to show off the funnies is itself very low. To again refer to the Command Zone's Bracket 1 video, Rachel and Olivia label it as a misconception that Bracket 1 decks aren't able to do commandery things, that these decks should still contain removal spells and board wipes, that, quote, you're a commander deck and need to behave as one. Love that. That's the type of Bracket 1 deck that sounds enjoyable to me, and which I think will also largely elide most of the concerns that I had with the previous issue that I just yapped on about forever. Thing just is, I don't know that that report has always lined up with what I've seen people experimenting with in Bracket 1. I have seen those art piece style decks that aren't always behaving entirely like commander decks would normally do. I've provided an example of 2 of those in this very video. I've also seen mission-based decks. If you're familiar with the Thought Vessel podcast, first of all, Levi helped me out with the script. Thank you so much, Levi. And Joe from that show has a Bracket 1 deck where the whole point of the deck is to accomplish Sephiroth killing Aerith. The victory point is not winning the game, it's recreating the scene. That's amazing. Just absolutely baller. Joe, send us the deck immediately. But so, okay, with a mission-based deck like that, there are then kind of 2 versions of how that could play out, right? There's the version where that's the whole goal at the expense of all else. A monomaniacal focus on executing that plan, literally executing it, independent of any other player's developments in the game, which could end up leading to those 3-player game scenarios that I described earlier. And there's the other version, which I think is probably the one that Joe is actually aiming towards a little more, where he's attempting to make that moment happen despite all of the other events that are happening in the pod, despite everyone else's plays, having to defend and interact and remove and impede others to buy enough time to make that scene occur. I think that's how Joe plays it, but I don't know, I could be wrong. You should probably check out their show for more information. And thank you again, Levi, for all your help, dude. Point is, those are 2 different types of experiences. That one Bracket 1 deck has 2 different ways that it could affect the balance of a game. And some Bracket 1 decks will end up going down one of those routes, while some go down the other. But they're both currently under the same umbrella, under the same header. So extra clarification is going to end up being needed here. Because yeah, it turns out, despite Bracket 1 not being a very populated place right now, it still holds a huge breadth of potential experiences. And in terms of solutions to this type of issue, well, like I just said, some extra info, some extra communication is going to be needed for sure. But also, I think sometimes we just didn't even know what to do extra communication about in the first place. So I hope that understanding those 2 different routes thing is a helpful starting place for folks who weren't entirely sure how to convey some of their thoughts about the different potential Bracket 1 decks that they wanted to use. But for some of the other associated associated things here, I don't know. I don't actually have a super solid answer to this one. My instinct is that decks, even meme ones, should probably make some attempt to try and curate their lists such that they contain staple categories and that will let them participate in game activities at least a little bit, because even if they don't get to like showcase their jokes, a game just ends up feeling a little bit better when everyone contributed a little bit to the direction that it wound up going in. And that seems to have matched up with what Rachel and Olivia said in that episode too. But I have also seen some people not jiving with that opinion because it feels to them like it's a little bit too close to the types of efficiency and tuning habits that characterize deck building in other brackets. No one is all wrong or all right here. If anyone is wrong, it's probably me. It's entirely possible that I am simply misunderstanding the bracket 1 dynamics here too, in which case, let me have it in the comments. I'm simply reporting my confusion because I don't think I'm alone in that confusion. My perception here is that there is a dichotomy of experiences, and that means that people will be drawing from different memories and different associations when they hear the broad term bracket 1. And that just could make it into being a little bit harder to know what it is that you will be signing up for. This isn't some dire issue. I do think it's very solvable. It's just that there's an ambiguity here that could end up being another one of those speed bumps in the way of people's desire to build or see a bracket 1 deck. There's ambiguity here, and the only way to normalize anything is to clear up ambiguities. Issue number 4. Price. This is a quick one. I've referred to the reading the card explains the card example a couple of times now, but do you know how much that deck would actually cost to put together in paper? It's over $2,000. Cards like the Textless Omnath are like $100 each. And as much as I love this joke, I'm not going to spend $2,000 on it. The solution speaks for itself. People proxy stuff all the time, so maybe proxying an entire deck is not a barrier at all to a whole bunch of folks. Fair enough. And I'm realizing in saying this that people are going to think that it is a barrier for me. I don't think Coolsville sucks, okay? Let's just focus. This just is a different approach to deck building, and it's a difference worth acknowledging that could, for some folks, serve as yet another one of those potential speed bumps. And I'm just trying to map out what speed bumps or potholes exist in the roads to normalization, you know? Deck building here, deck building for bracket 1 will feel different. And in most cases, a good version of different. Like finding all of the art with mustaches on it or whatever is hilarious. But if deck building in this new bracket also requires certain versions of cards, then I don't know, the associated effects of that reality are a detail worth people knowing about beforehand so that they understand what it is that they're in for when they give it a shot. And finally, issue number 5, time. This is the one where I'm going to ask for the most patience because my feelings here are only half formed. And I think that these feelings are also rooted in, I guess, a sort of cynicism that I'm actually hoping to escape from rather than sink further into. So I hope you're okay helping me out with that. I have yet to be in an all bracket 1 pod. I would like for a world to exist where that could happen more regularly. But as a person who is on the slight outside of that experience, I end up with an anxiety when I imagine it. And this is possibly a completely unfair and uninformed anxiety, but I end up with this suspicion, this worry, this feeling that an all bracket 1 pod where there's no mismatches at all, no bracket 2 decks, just like everyone's on bracket 1, where that could end up feeling like improv without the straight man. For folks unfamiliar, the straight man or comedic foil in an improv scene or a comedy sketch is the one relatively normal person behaving like a normal person and doing things that a normal person would in a crazy scenario. Their presence in a scene kind of helps to ground it, but it also mostly serves as a contrast to their comedic partner's eccentricities. Like this person's wackiness is amplified by the fact that this guy over here is being more deadpan. This is important for comedy just because, like, in a scene where everyone is the eccentric person, sometimes the jokes don't end up as good. Having the contrast is sometimes what allows for the jokes to land in the first place, you know? Look, Commander isn't improv comedy, so this comparison is gossamer thin and, like, not at all a one-to-one. It's apples to oranges, truly. I'm just using this metaphor as a springboard to voice a concern that I haven't really been able to put into words, or that for some folks might feel like an unspoken concern a lot of the times. That if everyone is committing to different bits, if everyone is the eccentric person, would that reduce the novelty in some way? Would that affect our enjoyment at all? Does it mean that maybe the jokes end up overstaying their welcome or something like that? And if everyone in a pod is playing a bracket 1 deck, like if we do end up with that ideal future where in a pod we could actually get an all bracket 1 game and everyone in that pod is playing a deck that doesn't care about winning, what does the gameplay actually feel like? Does the game take 3 hours? Are there just board stalls out the wazoo? Do the jokes end up feeling tired after a while? Does it become the happily ever after ending from Slay the Princess? Like, what does the actual practical reality of an all bracket 1 pod look like? Or Is there a piece of them that maybe needs a little bit more connective tissue to the straight man normal experience to help ground and facilitate the best possible version of what it is that we want those things to be? I don't know, and I don't have solutions about that because I don't live in that world yet. It's just one of those final issues or problems or anxieties that crosses my mind when I'm trying to evaluate all of this. Here's this end goal that idealistically I would like us to have, but I don't want that to just stay as an abstract goal. I want to know what it is that we do when we get there. Like if I'm a dog chasing cars, what do I do when I catch one, right? So what does it actually look like concretely when we achieve that goal? And is there something about that endpoint that hasn't been considered yet? All I know is that I am an anxious person who imagines worst case scenarios, and this is another one of those moments where the form that this takes here is that like we achieve the goal, but then it turns out people hate the end result or something. And that type of anxiety is, in the first place, the kind of thing that can prevent a goal like that from ever being achieved at all, being hesitant to find out what is on the other side. Like a part of me hopes that I'm not alone in having those anxieties, but a bigger part of me hopes that I am alone in having those anxieties, because the fewer people feel a hesitation like that, the sooner that this kind of thing could be achieved. So again, I don't know, but what I will say is this. Even in having just talked about this, in voicing that concern so that it's no longer just a thing floating abstractly in my head, but I can actually like take it out and look at it now, what's happened is that I've begun to talk myself out of this worry. The longer that I dwell in that feeling, thinking that the weird, unhinged bracket 1 versions of gameplay rely upon the same comedic hinges as improv comedy does, like I'm better able to see the flaws in that logic, the flaws in that type of anxiety, by just having committed to discussing it at all in the first place. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk, but psych, it was actually my therapy session. My hope is that me having talked through some of my weird feelings here might help you also identify what your hangups might be and to figure out what flaws may exist in those anxieties too. Wrapping up, I've mentioned a whole bunch of stuff about Bracket 1 here. I understand why on game night, where maybe you only get 2 or 3 games in, the dynamics that are so far apparent with Bracket 1 can be a harder sell. Like honestly, people's hesitation does make a lot of sense to me. Commander nights are limited, time is limited, and I understand why building decks like this in the first place could be a tough thing for a single person to do, let alone for a whole playgroup to do. I also understand that everyone's version of fun is different, and everyone's version of funny is different. Some people like chaos effects. I'm a little bit less enthused by them. Some people like CEDH, whereas I'm currently experimenting with never casting any spells that make me search my library for any reason this year. We're all different. Bracket 1 gets framed as unserious, when really it's just engaging with the format from a different angle. It's goofy, and yet it's probably the most difficult type of deck to make. This is an area rife with misconception, misunderstanding, and muddiness. But that's why my analysis of these potential issues that could exist with this currently much untapped area of exploration in the format comes not with dour warnings and pessimism and abolishment rhetoric or anything like that, but no, my analysis comes with a frank hope that despite me seeing these places where people are reasonably hesitant to fully throw themselves into a territory that seems this nebulous, that it's still frickin' worth it to get there. When I first heard about Elder Dragon Highlander back in like 2008 or 2009, I wasn't game to give it a proper shake. I was skeptical and I didn't want to pursue it. I only did so when the 2011 precons came out and some of my friends were like, Commander, but whatever, let's give it a shot. And I begrudgingly dragged my feet to participate. Yes, I was a pretty annoying kid growing up. How could you tell? And in hindsight, that's preposterous because now I'm making videos about Commander. It is my favorite version of the game that I love. If I had continued not giving it a shot, look what I would have missed out on. I just think that could be a pretty important lesson about how we're all engaging with whether or not to give Bracket 1 a chance today. People want the games that they sit down for to feel worth it. But that's exactly why making space for Bracket 1 matters. I'd like to end this video with a Patreon shout out. The Rebrandon, thank you so much for supporting the channel. You make this possible. I appreciate you even more than Iona wishes that she was unbanned. If you also want to support the channel, head over to patreon.com/EDHRecast. Thank you to Levi Perry for helping me out with the start of this script, to the Rebrandon for being a patron, to Dragon Shield and Cardsphere for sponsoring the show, and to you for watching. Give this video a like if you liked it, subscribe if you want even more, consider hitting our Patreon up if you want any perks. The guys are taking a break right now, but I love making videos like this for you all, so let me know what you think of all of these potential Bracket 1 issues. Let me know what you think of my Bracket 1 lists, but also, link your Bracket 1 decks below in the comments too. I really am just very excited to look through a whole bunch more of them to see what it is that people are experimenting with. Hope you had a fantastic time, but until next time, remember, EDH wreck your deck before you wreck your deck.